UFOs, Men in Black, and Secret Documents, and the strange fate of U.S. Defense Secretary James Forrestal. James Forrestal, the first U.S. Secretary of Defense, died May 22, 1949, more precisely at 1:50 a.m., which makes the case more mysterious. The circumstances surrounding Forrestal's dying hours were engulfed in dispute. All we know for definite is that Forrestal's body was discovered on the third-story canopy of the Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland in the early hours of 22nd. Did he take a fatal leap out the window of the 13th floor of the hospital, his mind in turmoil? Was it an accident, or was it something sinister? The mysterious end of James Forrestal? This is because for years there have been suspicions that Forrestal was aware of something, perhaps everything, the U.S. government was concealing about UFOs in the late 1940s. It was only a matter of time before Forrestal began to demonstrate psychological difficulties. Depression, allegedly brought on by his massive workload, was cited as the primary culprit. The situation deteriorated further. The depression worsened, anxiety attacks began, and a significant dose of paranoia overcame him. It was not good for the U.S. government. As Secretary of Defense, Forrestal was a critical component of the country's infrastructure. But President Truman secretly designated him as a potential threat to the Department of Defense orderly operation due to his psychological problems. And by the end of 1948, Forrestal's precarious mental state had deteriorated even further. At some point, action had to be taken, and it most emphatically was. Forrestal was relieved of his duties as Secretary of Defense, and the government's next step was to assist Forrestal in regaining his health. Naturally, no one wanted the man to suffer or devolve into a life-threatening condition, and as a result, the decision was made to admit Forrestal to the Bethesda Naval Hospital, where he could hopefully recover. Most certainly for Truman's team, though, was the genuine danger that a destabilized Forrestal may run off the tracks and reveal some of the most closely held secrets of the U.S. government. It was a perilous and unpredictably dangerous era. It would quickly deteriorate into a lethal situation. Forrestal had a strange incident a few days before he landed up in the Naval Hospital that had obvious Men in Black overtones. On the day in question, Forrestal was visited by one of his friends, a man named Ferdinand Eberstadt, who expressed grave concern about Forrestal's frail and paranoid mental state. Eberstadt, a lawyer, a banker, and an author of a 1945 paper titled Task Force Report on National Security Organization, was taken aback by what he witnessed upon his arrival at Forrestal's residence. All of the drapes had been drawn. In hushed tones, Forrestal informed his acquaintance that listening devices were hidden throughout his house. In other words, his house was bugged. Sinister characters were keeping a close eye on his every step, and his life was jeopardized. Perhaps it was. To explain this to Eberstadt, Forrestal carefully opened one of his slats and nodded knowingly towards a pair of scruffy-dressed individuals on the street corner. Forrestal told Eberstadt that they were a part of it, and within seconds, the doorbell at Forrestal's residence was heard ringing. Forrestal had no intention of answering the door. Fortunately, one of his staff members was on hand to assist him. A brief chat occurred, but neither Forrestal nor Eberstadt could hear it. The fact, however, swiftly came to Forrestal from his houseboy. According to what the two men were told, the visitor at the door was attempting to garner support for a postmaster position in his community. Could he come in and chat with Forrestal, soliciting his assistance and advice? Due to Forrestal's erratic behavior, the man was immediately dismissed. Eberstadt and Forrestal kept a close eye on the man as he walked directly towards the two ill-dressed individuals who had already thrown Forrestal for a loop, and when Forrestal observed the three clearly conversing, he believed that this was additional evidence of a conspiracy against him. Perhaps the entire situation was exaggerated by a guy devolved into a communal state of paranoia, terror, and nervous collapse. Without a doubt, this was what occurred. However, it's worth noting that this bizarre incident occurred during Eberstadt's visit and has some Men in Black parallels. To begin, the Men in Black are frequently characterized as seeming out of place. Their complexion is exceedingly pale, their eyes are frequently bulging, hidden behind wraparound shades, and they are occasionally portrayed as wearing wigs and makeup. The implication is that they are not human beings. On the day in question, Forrestal's workers described his visitor as quite odd-looking. The man's attempt to obtain access to Forrestal's home, claiming to be seeking support for a future postmaster job, parallels 1960 stories of MIBs breaking into the homes of UFO witnesses by posing as military troops or police officials, women in black posed as census takers, and gypsies. Gypsies? Are there gypsies in the United States? I'm sorry. I know there are gypsies in Europe, but I didn't know there were gypsies in the United States. Anyway, gypsies during the same time period. Clearly, they were neither. Forrestal found himself in an unusual and scary predicament, terrifying too for the man whose mind was crashing horribly. On April 2nd, 1949, Forrestal was admitted to the hospital for his own safety and that of the United States government as well. Doctors and nurses immediately recognized Forrestal's perilous condition, and Forrestal had a strong suspicion. No, he was certain that deadly characters were following his every move. Those who those same persons could have been varied considerably according to his frame. At times, they were Russian agents. At other times, it was U.S. government spies. Forrestal believes the latter was headed by J. Edgar Hoover's FBI. Forrestal's head was whirling, and not in a pleasant way. Additionally, Forrestal ceased eating for a period of time, and this is not a good sign, because it affects your brain, by the way. Now, it's critical to remember that when Forrestal was admitted to Bethesda, he was placed in what amounted to solitary confinement, with the room's windows modified to prevent them from being opened. That's what usually takes place on the higher floors of every hospital I know. Now, notably, when Forrestal's family inquired as to why such actions were taken, Captain George N. Raines, Bethesda's chief psychiatrist, stated that they were taken to prevent Forrestal from leaping out the windows, which some believe is precisely what happened that fateful night in Forrestal's life. After a few weeks in the hospital, Forrestal showed a noticeable and gratifying recovery. Doctors and nurses both confirmed. Additionally, his appetite began to return, to the point that Forrestal chowed down on a massive steak in the presence of Rear Admiral Morton Willcotts, who had come to meet an old friend indeed. It appeared as though prosperous times were ahead. That everything changed 2 days later, or more precisely 2 nights later. It was sinister events on the horizon. It was the end that was shrouded in secrecy. Let's examine what we do know for certain about those final hours of someone who possessed some of the most vital secrets of the U.S. government. Edward Price was instructed to keep a close eye on Forrestal. He was a corpsman at the U.S. Navy, and due to length of their time together, the duo developed a very strong friendship. As the night wore on, Forrestal informed Price that he was not in need of a sleeping drug and would instead immerse himself in a book, and that too was a positive development. Or at least it appeared to be. Following the conclusion of Price's shift, he was replaced by another military veteran, Robert Wayne Harrison Jr. Forrestal's demise was inevitable. Harrison Jr. left the room during his shift to perform an errand, and from that point on, everything becomes very foggy and unclear, and almost certainly something that will never be entirely resolved to everyone's satisfaction. Because when Harrison returned to his room, he was astounded to see Forrestal was not in his bed, and additionally the windows were open. Windows which were supposedly not able to open. Harrison Jr. dashed to the window, where the string of Forrestal's dressing robe was secured to the radiator. However, it turned out that Forrestal's weight caused the cable to snap, and Forrestal plunged 10 stories. Now, the official story is that it was his own act. The critical question, though, is whether Forrestal was pressured. The reason, to ensure that he could never, ever share whatever he may have encountered while serving in the government. One could argue that Forrestal and his end was staged to appear as his own act. This takes us to a critical point. What about the UFO connection to all this? To begin, there is the Men in Black and the Women in Black controversy, and within ufology, reports have swirled for decades that Forrestal was seriously considered going public with what he had learned about the UFO phenomenon following his appointment as Secretary of Defense. It's critical to remember that as the nation's first Secretary of Defense, Forrestal would have undoubtedly been exposed to the UFO phenomenon's deepest, darkest, and most secretive aspects. Additionally, there's a document. However, we should not get too thrilled. The document is one of those vexing, purported secret files that can only be obtained by whistleblowers. Bob Wood and Ryan Wood, father and son ufologists, received the document. It was presented to the couple by another ufologist, Tim Cooper. The reproduction document makes it very evident that Forrestal had knowledge of UFOs and his plans for all the secrets spinning around in his head. The issue is that the document provides us with an excessive amount of information, and no one in government ever would produce a paper that basically says, please go ahead and Forrestal due to his knowledge of UFOs. Such an act is ludicrous. If Forrestal had been, if this had happened, the fact would never have been recorded. Now, let's remember that we have another Secretary of Defense, which was just a little bit later, the Canadian Minister of Defense, former Minister of Defense, Paul Hellyer, that has been going around talking about UFOs and extraterrestrials, even humanoid extraterrestrials that walk around on Earth and look just like us. If we pass them on the sidewalk, we would believe that they were Homo sapiens. And Paul Hellyer obviously had inside information about what was going on, and he goes around the whole world talking about these things. Now, that is now, could these facts, the fact would never have been recorded and what would happen to Forrestal, but that is, a document is a forgery. However, it is definitely intended to make it appear as though Forrestal was forced to leave because of alien secrets. Whether a hoax or a piece of misdirection, the document is not authentic. Of course, it is possible that the purpose was to confuse the public regarding Forrestal, aliens, and UFOs, but we're certain that Forrestal had a very sinister end. There are so many bizarre components to the entire affair concerning the UFO side of the narrative. Nevertheless, much more evidence must be discovered to create a truly compelling case. This was from Infinity Explorers on Humans Be Free. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.